not met him in the past, either in person or through his videos or his publications, we know who we are listening to. It is really a privilege to host him on our series of webinars that we are restarting for 2025 with this distinguished scholar and psychologist. He is a professor of psychology and the founding director of the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University, USA. With over 2 decades of research, Dr. Steger has significantly contributed to our understanding of how individuals find meaning in life and in work, and how meaning in life and work contribute to our well-being and fulfillment. Dr. Steger's research explores the vital role of meaning in human flourishing, including its impact on motivation, engagement, and personal growth. He has developed measures like a Meaning in Life questionnaire, quite a popular thing. I was looking at Google Scholar. It has been used over 6,600 times. That questionnaire of MLQ, Meaning in Life questionnaire, published in 2006. He has edited and published several works, over 100 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. He has co-edited volumes, and I was just looking at his scholarship. Even from Google Scholar, he has been cited over 40,000 times by fellow scholars like me. Okay, so today he is going to talk to us about meaningful work, and that will be the opener for us in this series of webinars for 2025, offered monthly by Positive Psychology Association of Kenya. So we are honored to welcome Dr. Michael Steger to share his expertise and inspire us in our own journey towards meaningful and impactful work. So over to you, Mike. You can tell us how long you're going to talk and how you want the audience to interact with you. We have a good interactive culture here. The Zoom is already full. We are also live streaming on YouTube. For those of you whose colleagues are still struggling, you can send them the YouTube link. So over to you, Mike.
Well, thank you, Dr. Salvam and the Positive Psychology Association of Kenya for inviting me and letting me take your time at the end of a day. It's the beginning of a day here in Colorado. We're in the middle of the United States. And just speaking personally, I'm content to not try to name everything after America. There's been some political changes in my country that are challenging for some of us. And, I'm just in the middle of a big continent is what's happening. The sun came up about 10 minutes ago, so I should be getting brighter and maybe not so lit by basement lights as I am right now. But greetings to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be able to communicate with you. Of course, someday I hope I would love to visit in person and share wisdom. It was really wonderful to meet Dr. Salvam and one of his students, I think, in Innsbruck and just have those connections. I am a extraordinary professor at Northwest University in Vanderbijlpark, South Africa, and have been there from maybe 10 to 12 questions or 10 to 12 years. And initially I was able to go 1 or 2 times a year just to try to broaden my understanding of meaning and positive psychology and flourishing and the human experience, which is what at least I'm personally interested in. And so I really want to preface what we're going to talk about with a very, very big caveat, which is to say, through historical accident, we are at a point in the world where still the fact that the United States emerged in the shadow of the very successful British colonial project. And at the end of World War II, the United States was really the only functioning economy in the world. So we were able to, it was a little bit before my time, but I've definitely benefited from this. We were able to be the center for rebuilding, in a sense, international knowledge at a time when already English was the spoken language of much of the scientific world. So I was born with some advantages of being able to speak the language of science in a country where many of the most important journals, or at least most cited, and many of the most important universities existed. So um, I think I've been a beneficiary of a lot of just historically strange accidents that have elevated the American viewpoint on what it means to be a happy human being. I want to assure you that I'm very sensitive to this, even though I have limitations in my knowledge of how other cultures, or in fact, actually, most of the people alive today and most of the people who have ever existed view being a thriving individual because the American culture is quite strange when you look across history and when you look across the world. And yet it's the most influential one in terms of building our knowledge of happiness and thriving. So I find myself in this strange position of speaking from my culture, but with that still being represented for some reason as universal. So I want you to know that when I'm talking about meaningful work, it's heavily, heavily influenced by ideas from Western European culture and from American culture and even from American industrial and capitalistic practices. So I'm not making any claims that everything I talk about is universal. It might apply. I think it does in most of the times when we apply some of these concepts. But I will also say that I really truly believe we are missing a lot about human wisdom, human experience, cultural wisdom, cultural practices, on what it means to be a wonderful, thriving human being. And those have not been pulled into our body of knowledge that we consider to be um, the canon of knowledge. So I really want to say that we're coming from this perspective. From my perspective, it's limited, and I keep wanting to use my life to learn more, especially outside of my cultural context. But again, most of the research prominence and access has been from the United States, from Western Europe, from Canada, and from Australia on these topics, with some amazing contributions from India, for example, and South Africa, Brazil, and some other places. But we're still just scratching the surface of what people around the world know about what it is to be and live a good life. So that's what I want to say. I'll try to speak for about 45 minutes. The focus of the talk is on meaningful work, but I think you'll see I'm gonna maybe veer off into a slightly unexpected direction with this. So why don't I go ahead and share my screens for interaction? It's really hard when I'm presenting to notice when the chat comes up. So I will try to pause every once in a while. If you're in an interactive group, I'll try to pause for questions as we go. Otherwise, we can leave time until we've got 1 hour and 17 minutes before I have to run. So uh, hopefully there will be time for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. Let's see, Dr. Selvam, can you see my slides?
Yes, yeah, you can go to the
Okay,
slideshow.
okay,
And
good.
Dominic, Mike, when you're ready for questions, Dominic would read the questions to you, and so he can make it interactive as well.
Okay, perfect. I think this may be places
Great.
to stop. So
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on leadership. In part, this is because there are not many talks on meaningful work focused on leadership. A lot of the research and advice on meaningful work focuses on what individuals must do. Um, and I think that's problematic because, as you'll see, there seems to be a lot about the world of work, organizational practices, and leadership that puts obstacles in the way of meaningful work. And I actually think we're at a point where even the concept of meaning and purpose at work is going to begin to be uh, exploited by those who want more productivity out of their workers, maybe even at the cost of thriving. So I want to put the focus back on organizations and group processes whenever possible, because right now, 95% of advice is for people to do more or think harder or take on more work. And we have a lot on our plates. So I start with this quote from Stephen Hawking, who is a theoretical physicist and had lots to say about black holes and time and all these very complicated concepts, and also was overcoming, as you may know or can see, some physical disabilities and progressive chronic disease. And what he thought about work was that it gives you meaning and purpose, and our lives are empty without it. I think if we define work broadly enough, then I agree with that. If we define work only as being paid to do something, then maybe that's a little bit of a limitation. And I think that probably Stephen Hawking thought his work was trying to understand the physical nature of the universe rather than working for Cambridge or something like that. So sometimes work is what we are paid to do, sometimes work is what we really do with our lives that we want to use to impact the world around us. So if the world's fastest summary of my talk is this, are you really here in this universe, in this manifestation with the people around you, in the place where you live, in this huge, huge universe, this massive galaxy, this big planet? Are you really here just to be overwhelmed by work, tasks, paperwork, or emails, things you're supposed to go do, things you're supposed to obey about, bills you have to pay, all these sorts of things? Is that really the heart of life? I will say no. So how can we weave in things that are important into the stuff that we have to do or the stuff that we want to use to impact the world through work? Now, I saw this figure. 87% of Americans hate their job. This would have been data that would have presumably been collected around 2012, 2013. And I had a reaction initially, and I'm curious what your reactions are when you think about how many Kenyans hate their jobs. Um, so my initial reaction was, this is very hard to verify. I don't think it's actually true, right? Because when I think about it, first of all, most Americans don't have any plans to try to leave their jobs. Some do, but most don't. And when you use other metrics such as job satisfaction or even engagement, quite a lot of Americans, more than 13%, say they're engaged or have pleasant days at work. So this figure catches our eyes. And oftentimes when I ask, how many people in your country hate their jobs? And I'll say, is it over 70%? Is it over 80%? A lot of people will raise their hands that they think that almost everyone in their country hates their jobs. And then when I ask, well, how about the people that you actually know? What percentage of people that you know hate their jobs? And it's usually quite a bit less. But this idea that we hate our jobs, in some ways, it fits in perfectly with the system that's coming to dominate world economies. That work is something that might be unpleasant, but we have to do because if we don't do it, then we won't be able to afford our lifestyles. In my country, retirement is tied to work, pension, old age funds is tied to work, and even health insurance is tied to work. So without work, you're alone and vulnerable. And if we're telling Americans or we're propagating the message that we hate their jobs, on the one hand, we are sort of saying that work needs to get better. But the flip side of that is maybe not hating your jobs, or maybe imagining you would like your jobs is asking too much. Well, back to work. Everybody hates their jobs. This is great news for some people. And the people that I think this is especially good news for are the large global consultancies. The reason this is a great news for large global consultancies is because as long as there are people believing that work is terrible, and as long as there seems to be leadership that doesn't change very much about how work operates, then there is a constant demand for trying to fix work. And that is the demand that these huge consultancies will try to meet. The McKinseys of the world, BCG stands for Boston Consulting Group. It's huge. Bain Consulting, Deloitte. These are massive, massive companies that have huge impacts and influence within organizations, but particularly with leadership. And they've offered a bunch of programs over the years that I'll show in just a bit. But now they're all offering corporate purpose programs. This makes me very, very worried. I would love it if I could feel extremely excited that finally meaning and purpose at work are being taken seriously by all of these big companies, but I've seen what they do, and it's not what we in this conversation would understand to be meaning and purpose at work. So this is a short history of business consultancy. This is trimmed down a little bit, but professional business consultancies got their start trying to increase production efficiency and maximize products or maximize profits. They're really focused in factory work in the late 1800s, and it was trying to figure out ways to make individual workers turn out more products in a shorter amount of time. It was a part of the Industrial Revolution, kind of the second phase of the Industrial Revolution, which started to look at how humans interact with the machines that were being built to speed up and replace human work. Then those programs tended to shift over to manager training. So you could not only try to manage the physical bodies that workers would use to operate machines and produce work, but you could also try to manage the brains and the mentality and the motivational systems that people then would respond to when they're producing work. Then there wasn't much more to squeeze out of that. We tried to make business consultancies would say, well, have you implemented new techniques and new equipment? Yes. Have you made it clear that if people perform well, they get a bonus, and if they perform poorly, they get fired? Yes. Well, okay. Why don't we look at whether we can keep your best workers? And that's where some of these job satisfaction programs began in the 1960s and 70s. Those programs sort of famously shifted into job engagement and work engagement programs because no one was paying for job satisfaction programs anymore. It wasn't interesting. Engagement was the new shiny toy, and people wanted to talk about engagement. How engaged is your workforce? How disengaged? How actively disengaged? How passively disengaged? And then we would see in the United States, at least, where the engagement of the workforce continued to drop, much as job satisfaction had continued to drop over the years. And so now we find ourselves looking at these corporate purpose and meaningful work programs. And I just want to say, these are pretty much the same content with different labels. When I've had a chance to look at job satisfaction programs, they looked very, very similar to engagement programs. And the corporate purpose and meaningful work programs look very, very similar to the engagement programs. They focus on motivation, they focus on incentivizing people, they focus on messaging, things that employees like to hear. And they try to focus on retaining your best employees, but also just basically trying to get more work and increase the productivity on the human side as well. So there could be exceptions. These purpose programs are quite new, and a lot of them are quite expensive to take a look at. But when I've had a chance to look, and when I've had people from these big corporate, either corporate people who are hiring consultancies or people from consultancies themselves, and I show them this sort of information, or I share this perspective, they're like, "Yeah, you're pretty much right." It's kind of the same recycled stuff. The reason that is a problem, or the reason they're ineffective, is because actually my cynical history of business consultation is that the goal has never changed. The expertise has never changed. For example, when Bain Consulting comes to help your organization, the joke I was told is that no matter what you ask them to do, they will tell you to lay off 10% of your workforce. They'll sack 10% of your workforce, and they'll just create the list so you don't have to, and then they're the bad guy. And whatever you want them to do, you want more engagement? Good. Fire this 10%. You want more meaningful work? Good. Sack this 10%. So the overall project of these consultancies is driven by the same sorts of incentives that they have in their own business. And really, what that looks like is that they train people in their work to be good at production efficiency, profit maximization, organizational behaviors and development that make companies more profitable. Because when they can make their companies more profitable, when they can make their clients more profitable, then they stay in business. That's what they're trained for. That's what presumably they're good at. And they're less trained to deeply, deeply understand research, theory, and all these reasons for why we should care a lot about promoting well-being for other motivations. When I'm talking about meaningful work and well-being and meaning in life, I'm not thinking about how to get more productivity out of you. I just think that we want our lives to be really as good as they can be for ourselves and for others. That's not the incentive system that consultancies have. That's not the type of people they hire. That's not how they train them. That's not really the kind of contracts they get. So we can't look to them to change the world of work for us. We have to probably think about how we're going to do that ourselves. So we're left mostly on our own. And if you've looked around the internet or even published articles on how to find meaningful work or how to promote meaningful work, what you probably have seen is that in, quite often it's not really the workplace's job. It's not the boss's job. It's not your manager's job. They give you a salary and benefits. That's their job, and then you have to find meaningful work on your own. And it shows in the way that work is done. Now, this is a little bit of a culturally specific sort of thing. In the United States, if you drive down a street, you see these giant signs advertising every business, in particular, fast food businesses like McDonald's or the KFC, Kentucky Chicken. In this case, this is a hamburger chain and they sell hamburgers. And what they'll do is they'll send some 17-year-old person out with a very, very long pole that has a grabbing mechanism, and they put these letters individually into these slots. They have to either bend them and tuck them into the slots, or they slide them from the side. It's time consuming. You're holding a pole way above your head, so it's even slightly difficult and it's even tiring. And this person, rather than writing hamburgers $1, wrote, I don't get paid enough to do this, which is a lot more work than writing hamburgers for $1. So we're constantly confronting people who hate being in the jobs that they have but feel trapped. In one sense, this is good for employers because if your employees are trapped, you don't have to give them as much in order to keep them working. On the other hand, it's really bad because our experience of going to those businesses and of course, the experience of the people working for these businesses is pretty terrible on average. People don't take notice of what they care about or what's important at the work. You can see here is this alcohol, 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 alcohol. But the sign says baby, all the best for your baby. I mean, wine and beer is not the best thing for your baby. I'm no pediatrician, but I know that at least. So we get these problematic experiences at work where no one seems to care or invest in what's being done. This shows up even in high profile cases. This is CNN, a global news organization based in the United States. And this is someone reporting a very tragic event where giant hornets killed 42 people in China. Now, stepping aside from any political ideas about if Hong Kong is a part of China when legally when this was, filmed, I don't really know. I don't know the date of this, but I do know that Hong Kong is not the same city as Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. But this map shows Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. They just label it Hong Kong. Now, you might say Americans, we don't know our geography, so we wouldn't notice. But it's still kind of sad that so much poor work, inaccurate work, and sometimes really costly work is done in the world because people aren't really able to connect to it. So, whether you think meaningful work is vital or not, I want us to at least agree that meaningful work is better than unsafe work or dehumanizing work or meaningless work. If we can have meaning in our work, that would be better. I'll show you some of the research on why that's the case, but you know, we ought to be providing it for people rather than telling them that they need it and not really helping them find it. So just a quick word on these images. I don't know what this person holding the target's job is or how that works. It just struck me as a very scary, potentially very scary job. This job in the lower right-hand corner is a window washer. I'm very, very interested in the field of window washing. It's executed with such a huge range of safety procedures. This person has what you would consider to be a low safety um, a situation. It's a rope rappel situation. Probably it relies entirely on his skill at setting up um, his rappel and his ropes and all these sorts of things. But it's better than some. I've seen pictures of people basically, 100 floors above the concrete, just leaning out windows and cleaning the outside while standing on these little windowsills. So it's one of those jobs that can be done really well, or it can be done very dangerously. In the lower left-hand corner, we have images of a gold mine in Brazil where people are just hauling out the ore and the rubble by hand on their backs in dangerous situations. There's quite a lot of reported casualties, and in fact, there's a movie called PPAK that has a scene from this. And one of the things that eventually they're carrying out of that gold mine are bodies of people who either became exhausted or injured. And then on the top left, we have a woman catching elephant dung. Now, there's nothing inherently dehumanizing or bad about that job. It's a reference to a very famous paper called Call of the Wild, where Bunderson and Thompson took a look at zookeepers in particular and why they are so exploited. So they revealed a dark side as well as a very wonderful side of meaningful work, which is a lot of times the work is so important to people that they will do it even if we keep treating them worse. Now, maybe you think of nurses or maybe you think of teachers when you hear that, how we keep treating some professions worse, but they're so important to our society or the people who do them are so passionate and driven that they keep persevering. Um, so corporations potentially, when they hear that someone can be really pushed to their limits if they care passionately, if it's meaningful to them, they may hear the message, well, if we make our work meaningful to our employees, we can push them farther. So this is the sort of dangerous part of meaningful work, is people who believe their work is meaningful can be maybe more uh, vulnerable to exploitation. But there's a lot of people get exploited whether their meaningful work is meaningful or not. So I'll run through the research and then I'll give a quick glimpse of how we typically measure, or at least from my approach, measure and understand meaningful work, and then I'll pause for questions. So this is a brief summary. There wasn't so much research for the longest time. I wrote my first paper on, or I produced my first questionnaire on meaningful work around 2012. That's the work and meaning inventory. It's currently the most used way of measuring meaningful work in research. And so I think something like in the past 20 years, even though it's only been around for 12 of them, it's been used about 57% of the time. So 57% of the research that's been done since 2004 has been done using my measure, which came out in 2012. So it's pretty popular, but it was part of a renewed interest in understanding meaningful work. And so at the beginning, there wasn't too much research. Now there's literally too much research. It's impossible to keep track of anymore. I'll be sharing some results later from a review article that you might find useful. But the main sorts of outcomes of meaningful work are that people find their jobs more satisfying and they're more committed to their careers. So someone has work that they think is meaningful in a field of teaching, for example, or a field of positive psychology. They're more committed to that career, even when there's bumps, ups and downs. They don't just change careers like they change clothes or change style. They're more motivated, and this is intrinsic motivation. So this comes from self-determination theory, which is a powerful and beautiful theory of how people can achieve well-being and meet their psychological needs. It's also a theory of motivation. So intrinsic motivation says we do it for internal or personal reasons or deeply held reasons. We don't do it for money, we don't do it for status, we don't do it for fear. People who have meaningful work show less depression and less hostility. So the workplaces are nicer and they have higher levels of meaning in life as well. The next little bunch I'll talk about is how we use strengths in work. And Character strengths are really an important concept within positive psychology, so I'm sure that if you've taken courses or attended talks, you've heard about this. But there's probably two major distinctions in strengths. So if you take a strengths questionnaire like the VIA, the Values in Action Inventory of Strengths, you'll learn about your strengths, and that's actually a process of endorsing those strengths. So one of my top strengths is curiosity. So when I complete these scales and I say, oh, there's my top strength, it's curiosity, that is a way of endorsing those strengths. So as we become aware of our strengths and we begin to um, be less shy about them, we're endorsing our strengths. However, then we need to find a way to use our strengths. And if we can use our strengths at work, that's actually probably the number one predictor that I'm aware of right now of whether our work is going to be meaningful. So, can we bring the best of ourselves to our work? If we can, then probably our work will start to feel more meaningful. And people still like to think about flow at work, where you get into the zone. Time passes very quickly. You're just able to do your work without overthinking. And that is also related to meaningful work. Here we have another window washer situation. This is not acceptable. This is not this is not the best we can do for safety. It might be attached properly to this man's belt, although he's not wearing a harness. I know you didn't think you'd hear this much about window washing, but let me just say why this image is on this slide. Because if you look at the way that the helper on the inside is supporting his colleague, he's just really holding onto a rope. That's not quite good enough. It'd be much better if it was like wrapped around his torso or if it was anchored in some way. So if the person washing the window slips, there's only one thing keeping this person from injury, and that's the person's grip. So he really has to trust his teammate. And you see on this list, and Amy Wisniewski reported that people who have teams that have people with more sense of calling or meaningful work, those teams function better and they have higher faith in management. So theoretically, this could be okay, this window washing scene, if they trust each other and they have meaningful work. When we take a look at is having meaningful workers good, there's a lot of reasons for this, and you can make a business case. I'll actually show a little bit of a business case if I have time towards the end. But basically, people are more committed to their organization and they do these things called organizational citizenship behaviors, which is the types of tasks that we're not paid to do, but that make working at an organization nicer. So if a printer runs out of paper, um, you would refill the printer, even though you got what you needed from it. You might wash the coffee pot if there's a community coffee pot. You might bring snacks in. You might clean up the bathroom if someone made a mess. You're doing little things because you care about the organization, you care about the workplace. People don't want to leave their jobs when it's meaningful to them, and then they don't miss as many days of work. And in this research, this was all of the causes. This meant they weren't taking time off for being sick. They weren't taking time off because they hated their job, but they also weren't taking time off for holidays, and they weren't taking time off for vacation either. And then we'll talk about performance at the end, but basically, there are several studies that link meaningful work to self-reported performance and some studies that link meaningful work to objectively reported performance. All right, we're down to like maybe 4 slides before we'll break for questions real quickly. And this is sort of the model of meaningful work that I use. And we start off with work that has a legitimate function. So this is the opposite of someone who sits at a desk and has no idea what they're supposed to do all day long. This is the opposite of someone who does a job where they do all this work and then someone just throws it in the trash or the bin. It's work where you know that you're doing something that is important to the operations of the organization you're working for. Now, our managers and the organizations could make this easier for us, but they don't always. They oftentimes just tell us to do stuff and then don't tell us what happens with the work that we produce. That's a huge gap in leadership, but individuals can find that as well. If you feel like your work has a point, it probably can have a purpose. At the next largest circle out, it's important that our work doesn't harm the rest of our lives. If meaningful work becomes the only thing in your life, it can be problematic for our well-being. We're not well-rounded. We don't have good relationships anymore. So we don't want work to conflict too much with the rest of life. So for example, um, if you're a very environmentally motivated person, you can't really probably find meaningful work working for a very heavily polluting industry unless your job is to try to reduce the pollution levels. There's just too much conflict because what you're trying to do in one part of your life, it goes one direction, what you're doing in your work goes the opposite. It kind of cancels itself out. Whereas when work can be part of what you want to do with your life, if you're allowed to be um, spiritually alive in your work and spirituality is important to you. If you're allowed to build community and building community is important to you, then your work is actually part of a more meaningful overall life. And that seems to be quite vital to meaningful work as well. And then finally, work that serves the greater good was just impossible to get out of this measurement that I was doing. So for me, this is a little bit of an aside. You could argue that this might be an optional approach that people can find their work meaningful, even if it doesn't make the world better in some way. But the data would not let me drop this item, right? So when we interviewed people and when we distributed early versions of the work and meaning inventory, people said that my work serves a greater good. That's what makes it meaningful. They said it so often that it is more or less a part of meaningful work. And when I hear from researchers who use the WAMI, the work and meaning inventory around the world, there's only been a couple exceptions where this structure hasn't fit very well. And those exceptions have been in Germany, of all places. So I don't know why, but it seems to work fine in most of the rest of the world. So something is embedded in a lot of human cultures, at least, that if our work does good in the world, it's meaningful. So these three elements come together to create the sense that work is meaningful for us. I'm going to go ahead and pause and just see if there's questions. I'll give a quick pause and see if there's anything. I'm
Yeah.
afraid that if I access chat, then I'll lose track of where I am in the talk. So,
No worries, no worries. Thank you so much. That's why I'm here for you to, but you don't have to do that at all. Professor
awesome.
Mike, thank you so much for the presentation so far. There are no questions as such. What I can see here is a comment from from Vivian, who says most corporates in Africa, even those that are trying to realign themselves to address the environmental, social, and governance issues, are shelving well-being and addressing return on investment of their shareholders. So though that well-being can only be addressed after profit, including multinationals that would first focus on repatriation of profit. So there is that is more or less of a comment. Then Ali says, I think the meaning of work can be measured by personal individual reaction to what one does. So there's a subjectivity to the assessment. That's what Alice is saying. So may I encourage all of us to keep asking questions or making comments and reactions to the presentation that's going on. I don't know if you want to speak to those two ideas, Professor.
Yeah, I will. I'll just say quickly and then I'll jump back into the talk that I think they're both right. I know people who obviously we all in the longer we work in positive psychology and related fields, the more we learn about people who are doing coaching or consulting or started companies or managers who are trying to make well-being in the workplace stick. And what they run into is that if you pitch something that's going to take 18 months and the return on investment is going to be 125%, but it takes 18 months. And then some consultancy comes in and says, yeah, but we can save you 11% right now. And so you can go on that quarterly shareholder meeting and say, yeah, we've increased return on investment 11%. Then people just do the short-term stuff. And the short-term stuff oftentimes makes it harder to find well-being at work, not easier. So the incentive system we have, or at least the way that leaders, I'll make this point later, but the way that we're training leaders globally is poor if what we want is people to be feeling good about their work. Um, we just keep training them the same way, but expecting them to be different when they get into organizations and lead different organizations and have different priorities. and that's never going to happen, I don't think. So I'm very sympathetic to that view. And then, is meaningful work subjective? Absolutely. That is a great insight, and I want us to hold it because we often talk about certain professions as being meaningful. And there are a lot of people in professions like nursing or teaching or being a physician or a psychotherapist or a social worker or religious clergy, where everyone says that's the most meaningful job. You must love your job. You must think it's amazing. And for them, it's very difficult. At the same time, there's a lot of people, and there's been research. Now, there's more people who find um, jobs that require higher education, for example, more of the people who have those sorts of jobs, professors, CEOs, executives, lawyers, attorneys, things like that. There's slightly more people who find those jobs meaningful than people who find like cleaning crews or construction jobs meaningful. But there's a percentage, I think it's I think it's 18-ish%. There's a paper by Ryan Duffy that looked into it. And so there are people in every kind of job we would have to hypothesize that find their work meaningful. So it is subjective. We can't assume that someone who has a particular job title either does or does not find their work meaningful. But this also means that everyone in an organization could find their work meaningful if organizations and leaders cared about it. You don't have to say, okay, we're going to make our top salespeople find their work meaningful, and the rest of you, we don't care because no one could ever find your job meaningful. That does not seem to be accurate in alignment with the data. So this is sort of the schematic that I like to use. And on the red side, we have the inputs to meaningful work. And on the green side, we have the outputs from meaningful work. So if we make changes in the personal or the workplace or how individuals fit with that workplace, we'll see changes in meaningful work. And then when we see changes in meaningful work, we'll see changes in performance, commitment to the field or to the organization, and well-being. When we take a look at the personal side, a lot of what we start to track is um, really in the well-being and the commitment section. There are other potential outcomes of meaningful work, but they tend to get targeted differently. So we'll see a little bit of research on altruism. We'll see very little research on recruitment, which is odd because, well, it's a hard to measure thing. Like how successful is your recruitment requires you to know who didn't take your job. Um, but performance is one that's a little bit overlooked because it's quite difficult to research as well. So most everything is focused on commitment and well-being and this personal side. When we unpack this personal side, we sometimes hear people saying things like, I trained for this all my life, or I just completed my degree and I can't believe I get to use it. My work is meaningful. I feel happy and alive, which is a signal of vitality. I found a way to make it interesting, which is very similar to job crafting. I'm working with my passion. This is a huge piece of advice in this field. Find your passion and go with it. Or it fits my personal style, right? Like it just is a good fit with my strengths, for example, maybe even. Now, most of the meaningful work practices that have been researched focus on job crafting. One version of which is try to find a way in which your job can be more interesting to you, or try to find additional reasons or complexities or new ways or exciting ways to do your job. However, if you look online, and I do this every once in a while, most of the advice targets these other things where there really isn't research. There is research showing that if you have a type of passion, a harmonic passion, a harmonious passion, your work is more meaningful, but there's very little research on how to help people find their passion, right? There's a lot of advice about, get more training and you'll find more meaningful work. That's not really always been connected to research either. Find a job where you feel happy and alive. We know that certain types of well-being are different from each other. So positive emotions are not the exact same thing as meaning. And then finally, fits your personal style. That just is increasingly challenging to do in the world where, workers feel like they have less power or less leverage than they used to. So we do see a lot of advice. Most of this advice has not been tested. The one bit of advice that has been tested the most is job crafting, and that's just one small piece of the puzzle. The problem I see is that almost all of our approaches target individuals in a huge, huge global system. And if what we want to do is increase meaningful work for 4.5 or 5 billion workers, and meaningful work is subjective, then we need to find 4.5 to 5 billion meaningful work programs because nothing works for everybody. That seems inefficient and really problematic if that's our goal. Because those are the people with the least power, and it also means that we have the most contact points to manage in order to create meaningful work society-wide. However, if we focus on workplace factors and leadership, those are places that have the most power and actually the fewest contact points. If we could get them to listen, it'd be a much more efficient and effective approach to meaningful work. If instead of ROI, if instead of repatriation of profits, if instead of evading regulations, if instead of evading taxes, leaderships and work and organizations were focused on really helping their employees flourish, that would make it easier for employees to flourish. So that's the simple argument here. When we indicators of workplaces where meaningful work is happening might look like this. I feel a dynamic and creative vibe. This company has an awesome mission. They provide effective training for us to progress up the ladder. My coworkers are friendly. I feel connected to the company. I feel like I belong. There's a chance to advance. That's a big one lately. My leader is inspiring. We're carrying on a tradition. I love the beneficiaries of our work. And less often, but very impactfully, there's ethical and accountable management. So these are all like what you might hear in a meaningful workplace. So now the next section here, I'm going to run through research on workplace and leadership factors. And then after that, I'll take a pause to see if folks have questions. If not, that's fine. We can save them for the end. So this is the review paper. Yevgenia Lisova was the lead of this. I think Yevgenia is at Vrij Universiteit in Amsterdam, the Free University of Amsterdam. Then it was Blake Allen, who I think is at Purdue. Brian Dick, who's a colleague of mine. We were students together at Minnesota, and now we work together at Colorado State. Ryan Duffy, who's a real leader in calling research, as well as Brian Dick, and then myself. So we reviewed the research, and I'm just focusing on the workplace factors. We looked at individual factors, all sorts of stuff. So it's a decently helpful article if you're trying to get a handle on what we know about meaningful work. So first of all, we could take a look at organizational culture. And workplace cultures that are innovative and supportive of their employees, more people have meaningful work. If there's ethics involved in the workplace culture, more employees have meaningful work. That's what those pluses mean. You can see there's only one negative, and that's hierarchical work cultures. People have less meaningful work in hierarchical cultures as opposed to more horizontal or lean management designs. So the more you have to report to somebody, and that person reports to somebody else, and that person reports to somebody else, and communication must go up the chain, and your job is this, don't get out of your lane. All that sort of stuff reduces meaningful work. In terms of organizational policies and practices, corporate social responsibility programs do seem to be associated with higher meaningful work, as does corporate sponsored volunteering. And HR, human resources practices focused on engagement and employee development also seem to be associated with meaningful work. And finally, the social context, the relational context. If there's a positive social and moral climate at work, then there's more meaningful work. And if people have good relationships, they have more meaningful work. Of course, when we have good relationships, as we all know in positive psychology, that helps everything. So these are some of the workplace factors. So when you're doing work in organizations, if you can encourage some of these developments, you might be able to create more meaningful work for everyone in their organization, or at least to give them improved odds of finding meaningful work. If we tunnel right down into leadership, we can see that there's some research for three leadership styles, and then 2 leadership behaviors or perspectives. So the first one is transformational leadership. And transformational leadership is marked by inspirational motivation from leaders, intellectual stimulation, so maybe explaining why things are done this way, putting the company in context, talking about broader global or macroeconomic issues, just providing chances for people to actually think on the job. Individualized consideration, they recognize that we're not all stamped from the same machine, and that we're individual in lots of ways. So our work path, our work life is going to be different as well. And the idea of idealized influence is the sense that there's a good that we can all strive for, and we should try to encourage each other to keep moving towards that. So we're trying to grow as individuals, and that's embedded into the workplace. And when people think their leaders are using transformational leadership, they think their work is more meaningful. Ethical leadership is another model that has a lot of similarities, but leaders who follow an ethical leadership model are seen as having moral awareness and make decisions ethically. They have personal integrity, and they model what it is to be an ethical person in the company. So they are not hypocrites. They promote ethical behavior for themselves and others, and they express a concern for the greater good. Now, if they're expressing a concern for the greater good, that will automatically boost meaningful work, because most of the ways we measure meaningful work include questions about my work. Does my work do anything for the greater good? So that one is less surprising. But you can see that this is a different style of leadership than just increase profits, make workers work harder. There's another model called empowering leadership. And in this case, people are willing to delegate authority to workers to make decisions on their own, which encourages autonomy and enhances self-efficacy. When you are told exactly how to do a job and you have to keep doing it, even if you think there's a better way to do it, that diminishes meaningful work. So when leaders try to empower their employees to find new ways to innovate, to put their personal stamp on things, that increases autonomy, self-efficacy, and meaningful work. They include employees in decision making. They provide information and resources that employees can use to make those decisions and to execute their work. And they offer support and coaching. So those three big leadership styles are all associated with meaningful work. And if you're trying to figure out what do they all have in common, they're less command and control. They're not just telling people you do it and I don't want to hear a word out of you. They're really trying to celebrate the individual. They're modeling what it is to be a good worker, even at the leadership level. Oftentimes they're modeling ethics and morality as well, and they care about individuals. I skipped communicating your organizational mission, but when you can do that, that is effective for improving meaningful work. And then this is an example of leaders as architects of meaning. So this is a research paper from Canton in 2018, and it was focused on cleaners at NASA with this quote here: "I'm not mopping the floors, I'm putting a man on the moon." The piece there was that NASA leaders were providing a meaningful reason for why everyone in the organization had to do their work. And that trickled down or was directly provided for everyone, whether they were cleaning or whether they were designing key technological parts or whether they're astronauts themselves. So if you build structures of meaning into all of the components of your organization, then people can find meaning easier. And that seems pretty obvious, right? And then this is one of our, I can't see my preview, so I can't exactly remember how many more slides we have, but this might be a decent place to stop. Bad leadership, though, hurts meaningful work. This is Ryan Duffy again, and abusive workplaces where workers feel overburdened, overworked, those places diminish meaningful work. So basically the typical workplace diminishes meaningful work because we're constantly being asked to do more. And there was a really interesting project by Kate Bailey and Madden at University of Sussex, I believe, in England. And they interviewed 135 employees from all sorts of different backgrounds. And it was an interview about meaningful work. They wanted to understand what are the dynamics, where does meaningful work come from? And almost no employees mentioned their bosses at all. But when they mentioned them, they said, yes, my boss makes my life worse. My boss makes it harder to find meaningful work. So we know the practices that improve meaningful work. Most leaders don't do them. We know the abusive work practices that harm meaningful work. Most businesses employ those practices. And we know that for the most part, when we get data on these sorts of questions about what makes work meaningful, When bosses come up, it's because they're bad for meaning. So something about the way that we're training leaders is not fantastic. Okay, I'm going to actually run through a couple more slides here just because we're on the theme of leadership. And this is how meaningful work can be seen. If you remember that slide I showed with the red inputs to meaningful work, the blue meaningful work circles, and then the green outputs of meaningful work, this is research supporting that approach. So when people engage in transformational leadership, that increases meaningful work, and that one of the outputs is psychological well-being. Just to choose that first line. I drew a little schematic there for you, just to know what I'm talking about as meaningful work as the mediator. So when we do something with leadership, meaningful work changes. As meaningful work changes, that changes well-being. So if we take a look, we see that transformational leadership improves well-being because it increases meaningful work. It improves organizational emotional connections and commitment because it increases meaningful work, and so on. Ethical leadership increases organizational identification and work engagement because it increases meaningful work. And leader member exchange models get people working harder and more committed, but also uh, send them home happier, which enriches their family lives. Again, because those member exchange models, excuse me, increase meaningful work. So that's what that looks like. And then we can pause here to see if anyone has questions or whether we should just keep chugging away.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Professor Michael. This is very exciting. I'm sure a lot of us are benefiting from the presentation and how it relates also to our own personal experiences in the spaces that we work in. Now, there are a few questions. Polycarp asks you, what is your take on the adage that as managers, we need to focus on impact management rather than time management? How does that fit into meaningful work? I don't know if you want me to ask you a series of questions or you comment on question by question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love this. We can do a series of questions. So yeah, so on this one, I think so I'm a little subversive. I would like to change how organizations work. So I'm going to interpret this question as meaning if we're getting away from managing the time of our workers, we're also getting away from telling them how to do the work. And we're instead focused on output. We're focused less on them doing things or looking like they're working in a particular way and more on whether the work they're doing is high quality. And I think that's a good change. There's other ways you can interpret this question. Um, it to me it comes down to a trust issue. When managers or organizations try to track and monitor and manage time, in a lot of cases it's because they don't think their workers will actually work for them. They think they'll do other things. And when we try to manage performance or have performance targets or productivity targets or potentially impact targets, we're saying, yeah, however you do it is fine as long as you get the job done. That feels like a lot of trust. That should support autonomy and self-efficacy, and that should support meaningful work. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Father Jeremiah says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's enlightening. Jane Wambugu, I think meaningful work is anchored in preserving the dignity of the human person, even as organizations pursue profits. That's more of a comment, a perspective. Benjamin Mutuko says, wonderful discussion. Now, Dr. Jackie is asking, I think about all the youth who are looking for marketable careers and wonder where meaning comes in. Or is meaningful work a concept that gains currency as one grows older? What is your view in that respect?
I have a crazy idea and then I have a practical idea. So I have kids of my own, and I thought I was going to raise them to just follow your dreams, follow your passions. And as I saw the workplaces change, particularly following the dot-com crash and then the global financial crisis that my country caused with our terrible and lenient regulation around corrupt financial people, um, the world of work has changed. And now I say, know yourself as well as you can, know what you're good at, know what you like doing, find marketable versions of those, and then work on shaping that to be meaningful and important to you. So it's like now it's money and passion. It used to be you could say follow your passion in a developed economy like the United States, right, where there was quite high levels of employment for decades, right? So the United States is a very strange economy in the world in a lot of ways because we get very panicked when unemployment goes to 4%. And that's not how most of the world is, right? So in a lot of places, if you can get a job, you should keep that job. And, that's, I think, underneath those employment figures and unemployment figures in the United States, that's actually the reality. People want to leave their jobs, but they can't because they don't think they'll get another one. So we have to be realistic in what we say to youth, and marketable skills is good, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing you need to think about, right? Kid A is going to be really passionate about this, have these set of skills and dreams. Kid B might not have those dreams, might not have those passions, but has deep values, right? Wants to honor those values or has strong connections to the family or community and wants to do something with that. So we can help, if we're engaged in that kind of work, help them find ways to do something that makes a living but also includes who they are in it. We can help them with both. My crazy idea is that the youth should probably stop listening to us altogether, right? There's a lot of, they're going to inherit the economy. The way that we have them inherit the economy now is to come to us, old people, right? I've got the gray hair to prove I'm old, and, beg us for a chance. And then they learn how to do things the exact same way that we do things, which is to make work terrible for people and only care about profits. Now, in my dream, I would love it if the youth who want a marketable career, but also want to make a difference in the world, also want to take care of their families, also want to be spiritually and ethically strong people, if there's a way for them to come together and start to form their own economic models and companies and startups and things like that without having to immediately then, if they're successful, sell to an older person who just still has that old mindset. It's a crazy idea. Um, Hopefully there's a huge philanthropist out there who wants to make that happen because I don't know how to do that. But I almost feel like it would be such a relief, wouldn't it? Like if we look at it, I think in a lot of ways we're hoping that youth will fix all the problems that we see in the world. We tried. I'm a Gen X. We tried. We protested. I burned flags. I marched. I protested for divestment. I did all these sorts of things, and the world seems no different. But maybe this next generation will make all the big changes we hoped we'd see. Some generations have, right? They've overthrown colonialism. They've overthrown apartheid. They've overthrown fascism in places in the world, but they haven't overthrown the way that we do leadership in businesses. So what how great would it be if we could really empower the youth to do the economy and experiment with the economy and work the way that they think would help instead of telling them that's unrealistic, go get a job. So that's a crazy wild dream. I don't know how likely it is. Probably not very likely, but I would love it if that came true. Let me see. I want to Kamau.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. I'm not always good, but I always care at pronunciation. So I'm going to go ahead and skip because I want to leave. I want to go through performance really quickly so I about some things that we can do to foster meaningful work, a little bit more practical, if that's okay.
Okay, so you take the questions after the presentation?
Yes, sir, if that's okay.
Okay, that's quite okay. Right.
Okay. Because I realize this is sort of a pivotal thing here. I do have models of what individuals can do to foster meaningful work for themselves, and this is stuff we could share with other folks. It's in this chapter. You see here on the second line, it says Steger 2019. That's a book chapter in Handbook of Positivity and Strengths in the Workplace or something like that. And I present a SPIRE model for individuals and a karma and managers. And that's just a list of what the research suggests would be best practices or focal points. So I want to make sure we get to something a little bit practical. And this study that I did with Nico Rose, who has a master's in applied positive psychology, it was all his energy. It was just some of my ideas. So he's definitely a leader here. I have this karma model that I'll show on the next slide. And he added one letter for actualization. And this was very wise. I mean, it wasn't really there in the research, but it is there in what people want from work. If you ask people, what do you want from work? Every generation wants a chance to advance and improve through their work. So it's very smart. So, and he built a scale to measure this. And what's interesting about this scale is it doesn't measure me, it measures my manager. So it measures impressions of your manager. Does your manager give you a chance for actualization? And you'll see here in my Spire model, I call P for personalization, includes this idea that we can foster our best selves through work by focusing on our strengths or our values or something like that. So this was almost 600 German lower to senior middle managers who were then rated and judged on what they do. I'll show two studies from this. First, this is karma. This is my original karma. The first was clarity of mission. So remember we saw that if you express your corporate mission effectively, you can increase meaningful work. So that's what this refers to. And the item from the karma scale that Nico developed was my manager helps me understand the goals and strategies of the company. Again, this should be the company's responsibility. They hired us. They run the company. They should tell us why we're doing what we're doing. Number two is authenticity. And I love this item. This would never be written in the United States. My manager is an honest soul and communicates openly with me and my colleagues. I love that idea. So it's another reason why we need to step outside of the American cultural mindset to find beautiful ways of expressing what we're doing. Number three was respect. It could have been relationships, but I think the relationships at work literature is very toxic. It makes lower power employees very vulnerable to manipulation by higher power employees, right? Because we're all a family here. Okay, but you're the dad and I'm the kid, so you get to tell me what to do, and I can never leave, right? So it puts us in bad situations. It's also not behavioral. Respect is behavioral. You can demonstrate exactly what respect looks like at your organization, and you can hold the leaders to the same rules that you hold your newest hires. So I focused on respect here. My manager is attentive and perceptive when they interact with me and our team members. The M stands for mattering. I like to say every employee should know that they matter, of course, but even more importantly, every employee should know how they matter. That's a manager's job. My manager helps me to understand how my efforts contribute to the overall performance of our company. And the final one is autonomy, which we've discussed quite a lot already. Nico added this one, actualization. My manager is aware of my strengths and arranges my area of responsibility accordingly. Okay, so if you think about this list of items and ideas as steps you can take to increase meaningful work for those that you work with, then this becomes kind of practical, I hope, right? So it's not necessarily how are you going to make your work meaningful, but it's how are you going to facilitate meaningful work for somebody else? And if that's somebody that you work with or that you are leading, then your workplace will become more meaningful. That's the hope. Now, when we did a data collection in 2020, what we saw is that when we asked employees and we compared the lowest group, the lowest, 20% to the highest 20%, the people who rated their managers as providing karma, the people who are in the highest karma score bracket, had 58% higher meaningful work, 61% greater flow at work, 69% greater pride for company. And this was really interesting. So this might be the best job satisfaction item in the world. Uh, I would highly recommend my workplace as a place to work for one of my friends. Would you want your friends to work for the company you work for? If so, you have pride for that company. More engagement, a lot higher job satisfaction, and much, much lower intention to go find another job. So again, these are people who are saying, my manager supports me in this way. My manager supports me in this way, according to karma. So we do find evidence then that maybe this actually works. So I think I want to make sure there's a little bit of time for questions. If you don't mind, I'm going to probably fall short on a lot of things, so I'm going to skip ahead to sort of like the main idea here. Here's some of the performance data. This is self-reported performance. The only thing I want to point out is that we see here, there's a meta-analysis, so there's been enough studies done. We see diversity of jobs and locations, nurses in China, administrative staff in Jordan, bank employees in Indonesia, teachers in South Africa. And when we boil it down to hard data, we basically find many fewer data points. But there are evidences that when people have meaningful work, their supervisors see them as performing better. So there is that data, and that is the gold standard data. And I want to recommend a book by Raj Sisodia and colleagues called Firms of Endearment. The key here is he defines, if you've heard of the Good to Great project, where somebody went and said, okay, these are the qualities of great companies. Which companies have those? And are they doing well? This is stock market and profit return. If you take a look not just at good to great or a typical company, but companies who really have a strong sense of purpose, a worker-friendly culture, and a world-changing force for good mindset, like a very meaningful work culture, you see that they are incredibly profitable, that they're more successful than the Standard & Poor 500 companies by 10 times over the same period of time. So this is, again, more return on investment information, but it is harder to do than just laying off people, which is why we don't see a lot of people taking it up. Okay, so that's the performance pitch. And then we're going to skip these. All that says was that people who have a sense of meaningful work are very helpful and kind to other people, which you probably already knew, but there is a lot of research on that. So if we just sum up, and I've got 3 more slides, I think. People want meaningful work if we ask them. It's better for them, better for their coworkers, and better for their company's success. Leadership plays an important role, but usually because they make work less meaningful. And it's important to have a helping mission. So meaningful work oftentimes happens when our companies help people or help the planet. And when we can help workers see that they can advance the company mission through their own efforts, that's also another factor that improves meaningful work. Leadership usually plays a poor role. What is wrong with the way that we train leaders? And I'll just leave this thought. If we keep training leaders the old way, we're going to keep getting poor leadership. I don't think that's great, but I don't run a company, so who knows? Companies need to make a profit, but we should stop only adding more to every worker's job description in order for them to avoid the pain of bad leadership. The greatest things we make are with each other and for each other. And I'll end on that note, and now we can talk about questions all we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, if we continue training the leaders the same way, we shall have the same results. And I think someone defined that as madness, doing the same thing over and over.
Yes,
And
I've heard that too.
Yeah, perfect. So now, I heard you saying that the young people can lead the revolution. And I think in some countries, I think there's some research. I'm not very sure they get abducted when they try that. But anyway, let's talk about something here. There is Benjamin who says, does work possess meaning intrinsically, or can the person impose meaning onto it? I think that's what she's trying to ask. So thank you first of all for your presentation, and then we can now talk about it.
Yeah, great question. I think that work does possess meaning intrinsically, because if you scroll back a few thousand years or even just a few hundred years, work was just what kept us alive and what kept us together and what kept us safe. So work was just the way that we contributed to the health of our village or the health of our family or the health of our tribe. And the concept of work really only became kind of a big deal when people began to specialize or be able to get training for work. And then when the merchant classes around the world began to prosper, then they could say, okay, we focus on textiles. We focused on trading wool. We focus on building ships, right? And that's sort of when work became something you could choose, something you could step into and step out of. But I think the idea of working, that I have a life's work, is just in our DNA to be important. because that is how we show that we belong in a group and we contribute to it. Can we impose meaning upon work? Definitely, definitely. That seems to be the thing that happens most. And I'll say a couple of things. First of all, most people want meaningful work. And in a lot of professions, most people find their work to be meaningful, even though each of those people is different. Each of those people works for a different company. So I think that means that we're pretty good at finding meaning in our experience. If you compare this to the meaning in life literature, most people, when we study them, say their life is meaningful, right? And they're not going through courses. They don't have like inspiring leaders in their neighborhoods, giving them self-help. People know how to do this in a lot of ways, which is why it's so sad that we have such terrible management practices that take away meaning because instinctively we want to experience meaning, we want to share meaning, we want to give meaning. And so when we create these problematic organizations, that foils everything and we have to start over. So I
Right.
think it's yes to both for that question.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So the meaningful work is globally fulfilling, which Father Jeremiah says. One needs patience and to work smart. Okay, now, interesting question here. So job by Mary, job fit probably increases meaning. Hating one's job may have something to do with doing it simply to earn a living, and it was the only job available. There are regions in the world where unemployment is high and job fit may not be a priority. And especially, I would say, in countries like ours, where sometimes you're taking a job simply to put food on the table. It's survival, it's a question of survival. Like it's like in the structure of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you might simply be working to survive, the question of meaning may not be the first thing that you think of when you're looking for a job. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah. I think there's two parts that are really important about that. The latter half of the observation. In the first half of the observation, fit is important as far as we can tell. Mostly we see that in terms of strengths use and in terms of those leadership styles that argue to have people be able to express themselves and do work in their own ways. So fit is important. Um, Having a job you hate is always is never good for meaning. Um, and then taking a job just to earn money. The problem with that is that from the meaningful work side, the problem with that is that that's an extrinsic motivation, right? That's a motivation that doesn't typically yield psychological benefits, meaningful work or anything. Like just doing things for money for most people. There are some people where money is just like very rewarding for them. They're pretty rare. The rest of us, money is a necessary. So we're doing things for something that doesn't actually feed our souls. That doesn't mean we're stupid for doing it. That doesn't mean we're making mistakes for doing it. That means we're trying to survive or we're trying to take care of our obligations. And so that's the reality of a lot of the world. And so when I hear this question, right, so I've obviously presented this in South Africa, and at the time, South Africa had something like a 50% informal unemployment rate in Black South African communities, and an official 28% unemployment rate, which is devastating, right? There are some places where it's higher, but not that many. And the community I was speaking to was very well aware of that. And then I come along with my fancy ideas about meaningful work. Oh, it can be so beautiful. They're like, well, if there's 9 people standing in a corner hoping that in this week there'll be one job for one of them, where does meaning come in? And so I'll say 2 things about that. Number one, not everyone wants meaningful work, right? If we try to force it on people, we could be trying to give them something they don't want, could make their job harder, could leave them feeling like they don't have something that they need, like a create FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, and could actually put extra burdens on them. Some people want to go to work, get their work done, and make sure they have a reliable paycheck, and then go do other things. So I'm saying, sorry, that is totally fine. I don't want everyone to have meaningful work unless they want meaningful work. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. It's winter here. There's snow outside, so maybe I'm falling ill.
Sorry.
The second thing I'll say is, um, I think in those cases, we 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 should say the message should be we care about you, even if you are struggling to find consistent work, even if you don't have choices for work. We, at least positive psychology, but ideally society, we care about you. And the way that we want to make our impact is by continually pressing for those who do have power and control, who are running the companies, who are starting the companies, who are managing the branch in Nairobi or wherever, that those people take responsibility to try to start making changes, structural changes that at least provide more fertile ground for people to find meaningful work. Right? So it's not that much more work to endorse positive psychology principles or the karma model as a manager than it is to go learn Sigma 6 and we're gonna, follow every penny and we're gonna implement all these softwares and we're gonna spy on you and you can't do this and you have to do that and you take your clothes off and put the uniform on, like that takes effort too. Just because that's the norm doesn't mean that takes effort. If we put effort towards providing a humane and one of the people commented on dignity. If we provide dignity, then it makes it easier that if someone who's working part-time found work for 3 days this week, but maybe not next week, but those 3 days, they don't have to feel like society's outcast. They don't have to feel like someone who's less than someone who gets to go to work the day that they don't. They still feel like they have opportunities to feel like they contributed, that they were important, that it mattered that they were there. Whether they have to fight for that or not, I'm in a position of privilege, and maybe some of us are as well, to keep this message out there that we can try to provide with not much more effort and a lot more return on investment, dignified, humane, respectful, meaningful work opportunities for people. So that would be my answer. Again, that feels a little bit like a crazy dream in this world, but that'd be the goal.
Well, I think change starts with crazy dreams, so that's something still. Um, Jackie is saying it's a comment here, a funny one, but I think it's useful. Where do the office pizzas and we are a family, we are a family lie in the workplace factors that make one more meaningful, where do all that lie? Are they helpful? Are they useful? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're useful based on they haven't looked at a lot of those sorts of things like where tech workers in California have ping pong tables and slides and massage chairs and sugary cereal on demand and cooks and chefs and all those perks. I haven't seen any research that shows that that's better or worse than a workplace where you bring your own lunch in or you go out to the market to get food or whatever it might be. Um, Pizzas at work create opportunities, and the We Are a Family should be an invitation, right? We probably all have at least one person in our families we're like, oh, if I could swap, if I could exchange this one person, maybe I would. Uh, I see the family stuff best when it emerges as a feeling from meaningful work, not when it's used as a tool or messaging to try to create meaningful work, because that does create obligation and exploitation, I think, because we do things for our families that we would never do for someone who's just paying us money, right?
Right.
Um, the pizzas and things like that, again, they create opportunities for people to come together. And if you're working with people that respect you, that see you treat you with dignity, and you have a common sense of mission, all of which will come from meaningful work, oriented workplaces, then that time with the pizza will provide moments of great connection, and will be enjoyable as opposed to just food. Although, if your boss is richer than you are, they should buy you food. Why not? They've got the money for it, so make them buy the pizza next time. But yeah, I would always try to see as many of these the outward signs of cool, fun, happy workplaces as ideally growing from a workplace that's oriented towards meaning and thriving already.
Right, right. Perfect. I think the fear usually is that the pizza and the sweets are being used to not address the issues that actually are making the workplace toxic. Okay.
Yeah.
There's some
You
questions
get a
from
new
YouTube.
parking spot. You get a new
Yeah,
parking spot. Yay. If you have a vehicle. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Some questions from YouTube. Then we come back. Maybe We'll try to keep the comments brief because of time. Lizzie asks, how can we improve how we view our work when in a junior level as compared to someone in higher up or the decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, there's unique challenges to both. A lot of leaders don't find their own work meaningful. They just get paid more to do work they don't like, right? So we can't assume just because someone has a big paycheck or a lot of power in an organization and that they love it any more than we do. But junior and middle management is under unique pressures because they have to execute all the terrible policies and then they have to see what happens when they do it. And it's really tricky. There's no quick, there's more of a process than there is an answer to understanding meaningful work from anyone's perspective. And it kind of goes back to those three circles. That's one place you can start. Does my work do something in the organization that the organization needs doing? If not, are there ways I can shift away from the BS, right? The garbage work and more towards the impactful work. Uh, how is how does my work or my position right now, what kind of a character is that in the story of my life overall? Or what chapter in my life story is this? Right? So how can I see what I'm going through right now, if it's not wonderful, as one chapter in a longer story of my life's meaning, my life's progress? So taking a little bit of a perspective and saying, okay, maybe I feel trapped, or maybe I feel like this is awesome. I know I'm supposed to get promotion, but I feel like I'm in contact. I'm like actually working with people and they love my leadership. I know if I go up, then everything changes. When you put things into perspective, what is my life all about? Sometimes it helps us a little bit see what's missing or what is available in the work that we have. If there's things that are missing, I mean, you have to be very careful about some concepts like religion in workplaces can be tricky because for a lot of people, religion is very important, but you don't bring it into the workplace too often. For sure, you usually don't just like spring it on people without it already being approved, right? So, but there's other things that could be important to you. Maybe cooking or sharing food is important to you, and you can find a way for people to make pizzas over lunch or, you know, come together for some fun dishes. That is a type of job crafting, but the way to start job crafting, I think, when you're in a career path, is to take that step back and say, like, what role do I and what parts of myself and my dream for my life do I want work to express? And then finally, are there ways to benefit the greater good is always a nice thing to add. But yeah, another thing would be that I would always recommend is if you can find a mentor or a role model who somehow seems to make it work, pick their brains. Like someone who's at the next level up or someone who's at your level, try to pick their brains. Like we don't talk very often about why we like things that we like. We more often, at least I hear more often people talking about why we hate things that we hate. So in positive psychology, we have to be courageous enough to talk about things that we care about that are positive. That'd be my recommendation if possible.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you very much. Now, just a few more questions, and then we see what we
Okay,
can do. There's
we'll do
someone
this lightning round. We'll do this lightning round so I can
live
I'll
now.
take
Perfect,
perfect
perfect.
questions.
Okay. Now this comment on burnout at work and recalibrating the affected workers. Yeah, that's just a quick comment right there.
Yeah. So quick comment on burnout and meaningful work. Meaningful work is negatively related to burnout. So for most people, if your work is meaningful, you are less likely to burn out. However, some people who have meaningful work do too much, don't know when to turn off, and are more likely to burn out. So know who you're working with. Is that person likely to become like over involved and not understand boundaries? If so, then they're vulnerable to burnout, even if the work is meaningful.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Caroline is making a comment here that the three descriptions of meaningful work encapsulate the psychosocial development stages of adulthood and old age as outlined by Eric Rickson. Meaningful work persists beyond retirement, is deeply ingrained in the person. When individuals find significance in their work, they continue to empower their communities long after they retire, become generative instead of stagnant. Very good. But Jeremiah says to have these slides on our email. I hope that's something I think that can be organized, I suppose. I will go straight to a question here by Dr. Karachakwa, the chair of positive psychology. I have noticed that most professionals in my generation are in jobs that bring food to the table and also have a side hustle that gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. It still does not help with burnout. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem because we constantly have to do more in order to meet our basic needs. And you could argue that meaningful work isn't a basic need, but it's a thirst we have. You know, we could drink other things, but if we really want to drink meaningful work, then only meaningful work tastes like that. Right? So in order to find it, to feel like we are ourselves, a lot of people do take on side hustles, or they try to be influencers, or they try to have um coaching, or other sorts of things that they do on the side that's really more about them and what they dream in their lives, but it's on top of what it requires just to sort of survive. There isn't a quick answer to that. There's just a recognition that that is the path that we're told we have to take, because a
Right.
lot of times it's so hard to find a place where we get to come as we are with our best hopes and dreams, our strengths and our weaknesses, and deliver our passion. um, but we crave that, right?
Mm.
So it's a little bit like the retirement answer. If you can take care of money, you can find other ways to make your life meaningful, and you can view work as things that you put out into the world to try to have an impact rather than things you do for money. But it
Yeah.
does require more.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so Agnes says such a dream allowing the youth to practice autonomy and come up with different models of model and leadership policies. Beautiful, yes. I think that managers have a challenge with implementing karma because they also don't know well the overall goals or the big why, and they are too stretched the responsibilities to be able to do that or the ones they manage. Catherine says micromanaging people is such a headache to staff. Karma could be an alternative. Lots of positive feedback to your wonderful presentation. Then there is a question by Sister Rose Mwangi. Wonderful presentation, she says, but I think we should not work like work is meant to be finished, I guess, even if it's meaningful. Okay, I mean, it's more of a comment. Like sometimes we work like we have to finish the work in our lifetime, but someone says we always outlive work.
Yeah.
Um, Elvira Napora says, is it still meaningful work if the work removes you from other spheres of life?
Yeah. I mean, these two comments together remind me of the concept of purpose, right? So the way I view purpose in life is something that might never be finished. It's like in your maths classes, the arrow that keeps pointing to infinity, you might never get there. And the example I often think about is um, how Nelson Mandela had purpose even when he was in prison for 24 years, right? So he wasn't able to do it the same way. I would have, if I was in his shoes, thought, well, maybe I'll never see my people be free. But he still worked at it, right? And so when we adopt purpose as not like a checklist of things that we're going to finish, but as something that we want to keep pushing towards, I think that's one way to really think through this issue of um, can we ever be done with our work? And you know what? I talked so long I forgot the second comment. Could you repeat that comment, please?
Yeah, is work still meaningful? It removes us from other spheres of life.
Yeah,
I think,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Possessive.
So there's debate in the field. I'm of the perspective that people can have more than one purpose, and that they can't always be followed at the same time, right? So if you think of your purpose as I need to spend time developing myself spiritually, or I need to grow as a person, or I need to be a good parent, or I need to be a good son, or I need to accomplish this in my career, or I need to make the world better in this way. Maybe you can have two really powerful purposes that to do one means you're taking time away from the other. I think being sensitive about that, meaningful work can demand a lot, but it should never demand so much from the rest of your life, or it or be so separate from the rest of your life that other things that are important to you are inevitably hurt. You should be able to go back and forth, you know what I mean? Like, but I would just say the best piece of advice I can give is pay attention to the other parts of your life that are important and strive for balance. And if you have the sister's perspective that maybe you won't finish everything with meaningful work, then you don't have to feel so much pressure to put so much time in, because if it's going to take a million years to accomplish, you putting in 2 more hours this week or 10 more hours isn't going to make that much a difference if it takes away from something else that's vital to you. Does that
Right,
make
right.
sense?
Yep. Thank you so much for that. So new
Yeah.
managers, Velimo says, new managers may mean well, but do not have mentorship and how to ensure their teams feel meaningful aspect of their role. So Sometimes maybe we put too much burden on them. Dr. Susan says, very powerful presentation, Mike. Meaningful life, meaning in work is the way to go. Some of us work for very low pay with no promotion, but the fact that the job creates an opportunity for meaningful work keeps us going. We show up and God shows up for us. I'm more than encouraged by your presentation. Wonderful. So other beautiful feedback from people. Malewo says, can you find it all together meaning and purpose? What if one is missed? Does it say it's not complete and not there is no thriving? Okay, so can you, I hope you got the question.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, so we meaning in life has different dimensions, and conceivably meaning at work does as well. So meaning can have at least three that we know of, and maybe more as we keep going. Number one, right? This overarching source that we want to accomplish something in our lifetimes. We want to make some sort of impact. Number two is maybe we'll call it coherence or comprehension, like the ability to make sense of life, to see how everything fits together, to know who you are, and not feel confused and chaotic. Like if you remember when COVID really started to hit, everything changed all at once, and it felt we didn't know what was going to happen next. So that reduced our comprehension. So there's a cognitive component and a motivational component, purpose, coherence, and then there's a evaluative component called significance. Like I have value, my life is worth living, I matter. As far as we know, people don't have to be great or fulfilled in all three of those. Right? I myself am a comprehension first person. I like to figure things out, and then maybe I'll come up with goals. Then I think life is worth living. Some people are just like really struck with making other people feel like they matter. The task or the joy of being alive is incredibly powerful for them, and they're maybe significance first people. Other people get things done. Like they get things done. They've got long to-do lists, they are getting people organized, and they might be purpose first people. And maybe the same thing is similar at work, right? So if sometimes you can be really great or full of purpose, sometimes maybe not, and you're trying to figure things out again. And so you're back into the comprehension phase. Sometimes you're working really hard on purpose, but no one notices. So you're like, well, why did I even bother? And significance is hurting. So if you think about them at each as three different doorways or flavors of purpose, you can prefer one over the other. Maybe you've got all three working at the same time, or maybe you need to take a break from one so that you can go with one that's working a little bit easier. So there's no one path, there's no one template. I really do apologize, but I'm gonna have to go if that's okay.
Yes, yes. In fact, that was the last thing. That was the last comment,
Ah,
Professor
perfect.
Michael. Yeah. So there's only one funny comment here that's, while others are crying for too much work, I am crying to find one. So there is always that dynamic in life. So thank you so much. There's a lot of positive feedback to your presentation. So thank you so much. And I want to, in fact, call Professor Selbam to give the gratitude and to make the final remarks. Thank you so much for attending. Please don't go away. So that's for Professor Selbam.
Thank you, Mike. And really, we have kept you long. Early morning, we made you wake up early, and we have kept you long. Thank you. I don't want to prolong this anymore. Yeah, I appreciate. And as you
Thanks,
leave,
everyone.
I make some announcements to the rest of the group. So, my dear friends, watch out for the future webinars. We have started very well. I'm grateful to Kamau for moderating this discussion. And so we are going to share this calendar with you on WhatsApp group. I have already put some instruction on the chat. For those who want further announcements, you can get in touch with our PAK admin through the WhatsApp number, or you can put your emails down on the chat box. So one thing that I like to highlight is we have a series of webinars every last Wednesday of the month. Secondly, we have our character coaching programs. And so watch out for those announcements. And it's also on the screen right now. The dates we have in April, August, and November for this year. And then one of our highlights is workplace well-being, and that connects very well with our opening webinar that we have had. So our next webinar, it's not webinar, it's a physical workshop, is in May on workshop well-being. So we have an online block and a physical block. So we have already done an online one. So the next will be physical workshop, 3 days. As you can see, May 3 Saturdays, I believe they are. Then we have the online sessions on workplace well-being in July. Okay, it is stretched out through some days, and then again there is a repeat during the year. So watch out for all this. Then we would like to offer the Positive Lifelong Development online course in October. So you can see Positive Psychology Association is active. And if you want a 10% reduction on, or usually if the course is 5,000, if you're a member, you pay 4,500 on all our courses. You get a 500 shilling reduction on all our courses. So that's the benefit of being part of the Positive Psychology Association, and you really have opportunities to interact with colleagues. So thank you very much for your attendance. Put down in your calendar the last Wednesday of the month. Every month we have these free webinars. Then we have paid workshops and online courses. Thank you very much, and thanks once again for our admin, Naomi, who has been advertising, and Dominic Kamal, who has moderated this discussion. Our chair greets you. Dr. Caroline Chakwa, she had to jump to another meeting at 7 o'clock. And I promise in the next sessions, we will keep time. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Same to you, Father Selma, and Happy New Year.
Happy New
Bye.
Year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you
Thank
for
you.
those who have joined us
Bye.
from outside Kenya.
Thank you too.
I have seen some Tanzanians around here. I saw somebody all the way from even Germany. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.